Hey everybody, Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with bassist and artist manager Tim Tournier. Yay!
Hello, good to see you.
So Tim, I know a lot of people might have seen you playing with Miles Kennedy, and we'll definitely want to talk about that, but we always like to go all the way to the past. How did you get started in music and particularly on bass?
When I was a kid, my uncles all played instruments, and we're actually quite close in age, and the combination of that and then seeing Back to the Future when Marty McFly gets blown across the room because of a massive amp, and then he rode on the back of a Jeep on a skateboard, that sealed the deal. I was like, I want to be a musician, Mom. That's what I want to do.
Yeah. And
I was like, okay, great. And then as I eventually got to 5th grade and they had orchestra, I started on the upright bass. And just, never put it down. And as school went on, I was definitely the band kid, the music kid. I did everything I could possibly do with it. And I was lugging that bass around with me everywhere. So anyone who ever played upright knows it's more of a labor of love, because that is the most difficult instrument to be taking anywhere.
Sure. Especially
on a bike.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I remember having 2 straps on the case. And I would literally ride that thing on my bike back and forth from middle school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and just dealt with it, made it go. It got me into orchestra and chamber orchestra, all those things through school, and then into college, and was always playing. I would go back and forth from guitar to bass. But, playing upright and reading music when I'm playing, in rock bands and things like that with peers, there was always guitar players, there was always drummers. There wasn't always bass players, so... Yeah. Filled in where I could, did it for the gig, and fell in love, and here we are 30 years later still doing it.
Gotcha. Now, if I remember correctly, you went to Berkeley?
Yes. I got a scholarship, and then just as other people had told me, my mentor growing up was a guy named Dan McIntyre. He played guitar with Sinatra and Vic Damone and all these jazz guys, right? Mm-hmm. And he was one of the guys that vouched for me to help get me into school and kind of prep me for those things. And he said, well, if you can actually make it all the way through, that means I taught you nothing.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. And I didn't get it at the time. But then when I was in, realized how competitive it was. I was from a small town and things like that. And it was like, oh, man, I didn't dig it. But I was always playing and gigging and meeting people that the next thing I knew, I was doing gigs with people who were teaching at my college, and the next thing you know, I got a record deal. So I was in a rock band, got a record deal as a kid, negotiated the deal myself because I was too dumb to realize that you should get an attorney to do these things. And just like, it's like being a yellow belt in karate, as my grandpa would always say, just enough to get your ass kicked, just enough to be cocky. So I went to this school, I read these books, I know how to do this. And was in a band, got a deal, ultimately got shelved after doing all these tours, and then the label says, oh, you owe us $700,000. It's like, how does that work?
Oh, wow.
Well, you remember that deal you negotiated for yourself? Turns out it wasn't a good one.
Oh.
Okay. So that was the end of that. And it was, started just filtering around, playing with other people. I would call our A&R guy, and who liked me for whatever reason. We remained friends after those situations. And he would get me gigs playing with different people. And I would jump from one to the next. And it was seemingly like every time I would jump, that band would blow up and become huge. Like, I'd be in the band for like 2 months. Like, I hate it. I don't like the music. And I was a snob, you know what I mean? I liked playing Oleo on upright bass and not playing 4-chord punk rock tunes or power punk stuff, and like being on the Warped Tour meant nothing to me. Like, I was like, oh, this is cool, but this isn't like, but check this stuff out. You know what I mean? Like, that's where I'd go to, and nobody else got it. Eventually, I found myself on the management side of things, and it was always just like that DIY kind of mentality where a funny story that it's actually a true story. When I was in 5th grade, I talked myself into a gig before I actually knew how to play the instrument. And that is 100% true. So a friend of the family was friends with Dan McIntyre, who was my mentor ever since I was a kid. And I showed up for a music lesson, not realizing etiquette or anything like that. I just opened the door while he was teaching somebody else a lesson. And I said, hey, so I got a gig playing a train show at the mall for $50. I need you to show me how to play this on this. And it's like a handful of, sheet music and then a guitar.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, sit down. I'll be with you in an hour. And closes the door. So the hustle in terms of like self-promotion and understanding, and that has been there since I was a fifth grader, So it just kind of over time progressed to that's where it went. And Mark Tremonti from Creed and Alter Bridge, guitarist of the decade for all these publications, has always been a close friend, and we started doing business together, and I started managing him, and we started releasing records together and things like that. And next thing you know, it progressed into this really, I took over all of his projects, and with that, Miles is the singer for Alter Bridge, and when he wanted to do his first solo record, I still to this day play upright bass. And he was like, I wish I had an upright player. I'm like, what do you want me to play? You know what I mean? Like, I'll do it. And I did it. And he was like, holy shit, I didn't realize you actually played. I'm like, actually played?
Yeah.
This is what I do in all of my spare time.
Yeah.
So from there, it just kind of progressed, and now we're 2 records in, and I'm able to kind of steer the ship. Not kind of steer the ship. I do steer the ship with managing, and then I also, so when Mark will go out and do that, I look after Seven Dust as well, the other rock and metal band that's on my management roster. And then with Miles, it gives me that different perspective, because I started off as a musician where I love everything about music. That's the simplest form of it. From when I was living in a shitty studio apartment eating ramen noodles to now I'm managing all these top line artists, and now I'm able to go out and play these festivals with some of my favorite people in the world. It's like that's never differed from loving the art. That's the extremely long answer to your question.
No, actually, it's perfect, because again, I've heard there's a lot of people that I've talked to that maybe got a start at Berklee, and while they were in the area, they were getting work, they were getting gigs, they were getting offers, and that was a big part of why they even went to begin with. Part of it was the networking, because there's other people that'll go, and because of the time they spend with other musicians, that turns into they develop groups, and they develop people that they know. And like if I know a guy that can play upright, I know this guy that went to school with me, and I can kind of finagle that. But there's there's no wrong path, because look at where you are. I mean, it's just that was your path.
Oh man, yeah, it's one of those things where when I first started in high school and things like that, playing in bands, I was 16 years old playing bars. And thank God my parents were cool, because they were just like, he's going to be fine. He's finding his way. He's playing music. And they also knew that, like, if they took that away from me, I would probably become such a monster that they were like, this is pretty. He's not really good at mathematics, so this is his shot at college.
There you go.
So that's how we got in, and then just like you said, through networking and things like that, it just kind of happened. But it happened a little bit differently for me, because when I went to college, we had already had the band that I was in high school. We already had demos and things like that, and it was a demo that we had sent out like a year before that landed at the right desk at Warner. That was the band that got signed. None of this other stuff that I thought was super hip and cool and like virtuoso kind of stuff that I was trying to do as I was trying to stand out with all those other people in Berklee. It was the 4-chord rocks, and it's songs, and it's, going from that. And it's like, well, you got to wish in one hand, shit in the other. What are you going to do? You're going to go with what you got. So those guys were still to this day my dearest friends, and we're like, oh, let's go give it a shot, and toured the world in vans for years.
I hear you.
Making it happen,
Well, and it's also important because I think for a lot of musicians, it turns into they do get into it for the love of the music, But if they're going to make a living doing it, then they promptly realize that there are other considerations and things that have to be taken into account. And there's more, I'll say, bad stories that you hear of bad record deals, having signed away rights to their songs, band members getting chucked because they weren't in the original negotiations. All of the bad blood kind of stuff that you hear, that a lot of it will go back to a knowledge of business and management and going, okay, no, this is how we need to work this. And so many times, even like in the pay schedule, I remember I'd interviewed a player, oh gosh, her name escapes me right now, but they released their first album and it was a skyrocketing hit. They did really well. And when the paychecks came, they noticed the big difference from what the person that wrote the songs got and what they that just played the songs got.
Yeah.
And not having any song credits on the album, and going, hey, wait a second, we did as much work as this other person. Why is our paycheck so much smaller? And then trying to wrangle it so that each one of them would write so many songs to get kind of on the next album so that things would be a little more equitable. But, until they ultimately shattered and everybody went their own ways because they just could not reconcile that business side of it as much as they had fun musically.
Sure, and that's a part of it where I see that happen from the managerial side. I still see that happen with folks, where it's someone will write a song and are they pushing this song because it's the best song for the album or the best song for the band, or because they want the publishing, and it's like those are all things that, like, the way that the overall musician's mind works. One thing I had to adapt to early on was that part of your brain. You need to shut it off and start thinking about the business and the economics of the industry, which is one of the more difficult things for me in the early days, with making that switch over from being a musician and performing live to managing and like getting into that end of the industry. Was just going, how does all this actually work? The bigger picture, because as an artist, in those days, I had a hard time seeing that.
Sure.
I always saw it as like, here's the album, and we made the album, we chased it, and then we would then we would rush to put it out instead of really putting together the right plan about something and doing it like that. So many people would do that, and like just places we would spend money in. It's like, hey, we need to work something in radio instead of having a cool video or now social content piece that you can get far more reach with for a fraction of the money. And it's like, understanding how all that works. I was just a guy who was up there, playing triads around, 4 chords.
Yeah.
That was it. So it took a while, but we got there.
There you go. Well, and as we look for the most recent album from Miles is The Ides of March, and I believe that is the topic of the tour. Now, that was released in 2021, but as many albums that were kind of in the pandemic window, if you will, a lot of them didn't necessarily tour when they were released. Right.
So, and for that album specifically, we're a power trio. We're a 3-piece. But Miles, guitar and vocals, Zia on drums, I'm on bass. Miles and Zia from the greater Spokane, Seattle area. I'm from Chicago. We all got into a car and drove across the country down to Orlando, Florida, which is where Elvis Baskett, our producer, lives. All in the midst of the pandemic, which at the time it seemed like a smarter idea to drive than fly. And then the next thing you know, you have 3 full-grown men back into the van, 3 days of driving, you know what I mean? To make this record. And we all lived in a house together. Just Miles brought all the tunes. He wrote this amazing record during the course of the pandemic that, like, as he started presenting songs, he's like, oh, just check it out. Just check this out. Check this out. And it's like, holy shit. Like, where did this come from? And he's like, hey, I just like it. Do whatever you want. Here's some ideas. And he would kind of craft things with his demos and say, I really like this, run with this. And then when we're all in the studio, we're all kind of putting it together, going, in 3 months the pandemic will be over and we'll be fine. And that was in 2020.
Yeah.
You know, and then it's like we sat on the record. And you can only do that for so long while still being excited about the material. But then also, you know, it takes 6 months to get vinyl records done now, and vinyl records is like 60% of all physical sales. So the first sign that things were starting to take a positive turn and like things were coming back, we're like, okay, turning in the record, we're going to go tour in the summer of 2021. Life's finally going to be back on track. There's a vaccine now. Everything's good. We released it, and then like as soon as we released it, oh, here's the second wave. Like, oh shit. You know, and again, it's with where the band is and how everybody's in different spots. Like, well, you can do live streams and try to, you know, do things that are now becoming the new normal. It's like how to promote a record.
Sure.
But it ended up with myself and Chuck. We got in the car and drove to Spokane to film things, I think 4 times, from Chicago to Spokane. And it's because even there was no more flights that were even options for that. So it's trying to figure out how to market this record and perform it during a pandemic was really one of the greater tasks of my career. And ultimately, I don't know how successful we were at that, like, because we didn't get any live performances until September of last year. That's how long it took to finally, you know, when we plotted that tour, we had done what so many people had done. We booked a tour and then moved it and moved it and moved it and moved it until eventually it's like, it's September of 2021. Things are seemingly like we might be able to pull this off, but the band, we all had a conversation saying, okay, here's the boxes. If somebody gets sick, if this happens, if that happens, this is what we do. Is everybody okay with that? And everybody was eventually like, you know, okay, all right, let's go. Let's roll the dice. And we just kept such a tight bubble. We didn't see family. We didn't see friends. Everybody stayed together. We essentially all lived on a bus together, you know, us and the crew, and it's just, that's it. But we pulled it off, and nobody got sick.
Nice.
And it was like, oh, and you saw it, and it was a market-to-market kind of thing, where it was some markets, things were, you know, you would play Florida, you would have thought the pandemic never happened.
Oh, yeah.
You know, we played New York, and there was literally a guy that was essentially in a hazmat suit, and you're like, holy shit. Okay, maybe this isn't a good idea. Like, you know, and it's just, but we got through it. We went to the UK December of last year. We were really one of the first U.S. rock bands to come back and be touring over there. Mm-hmm. And it was just met with such like a warm response where people were just like, thanks for coming and doing this. Yeah. You know, but then we're also looking at this extremely complex record that Miles had written with so many layers and things that we're like back to going, we're a power trio. Like, okay, time to beef up some of the gear and try to make, you know, as many sounds as we possibly can. So I bought every Electro Harmonix pedal that there possibly is, and, you know, you need it to sound like an organ? Here we go. It sounds like as close as an organ as it's going to sound.
There you go. Kind of thing. Well, and it's a good time, since you mentioned gear, we always like to find out how you get your sound. I didn't see any uprights in the pictures I saw. I saw mostly Fenders and Mesa Boogie kind of stuff. But tell us, what are you playing on?
That's it, man. Fenders and Mesas. So my whole life I've been on Mesa Boogie. So it's just every different version of bass amp that I could afford as a kid until now, to where I can actually like pick out what I want. It's the M6 carbine and then the big block 750. And it's just, those are the two heads. And then I have a few different kinds of cabinets that just, you know, depending what it is, there's a 215 and then a 410. For the touring stuff of this cycle, I've just used 2 410s and just stacked it on top of their cases, because I'll always be the 80s metal kid who wants to be in front of full stacks. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, it gives it that feel, that punch. And then just either a Fender jazz bass, you know, depending if that's what the tune fits, you know, and there's things like songs like The Ides of March and like Worried Mind, you need a jazz bass for that. You know, that's where that sound comes from. And then anything where on the record, if I was playing it on an upright, I played it on the jazz bass. And really the reason for that is just shipping. I don't want to get a custom case made for my upright and have to ship that thing overseas, because
Sure.
I've shipped enough gear to know it's going to end up in pieces. You know what I mean? Something like that. So we'll just leave that for the recording stuff. And then just some P basses. I always do like the Safari on the road. The Fender Ultra series for the jazz bass and the P bass has been the go-to. But I am constantly doing the pawn shop finds, and any place I can, any time I can, I'm picking up gear, and I always bring back more stuff than what I left with, and now my wife knows. So like, there's no hiding it. But I got a 78 78 P bass in Antigua, which has just been, that is the sound of both the Miles records so far. It was a find at Carter's when we were on the first tour. We were just starting out and doing acoustic runs, and I went to Carter's in Nashville and walked in, and it was just like the Wayne's World scene where I just kind of floated over to it. God, how much is this? And at the time he's like, oh, it's $2,000. And I'm like, I'll give you $1,250 cash. And he's like, no, you won't. You'll give me $2,000. So I'll leave. And he's like, okay, see ya. So I walked out, and by the time I got back to the venue, I was on the phone. Hey, I'm the guy who tried to lowball you. I'm going to send the runner back with $2,000. I figured you would. So that's the go-to bass for me. And even with this run, I didn't tour it because I'm just terrified of something happening to it, because it has like the mojo, you know? And it's ridiculously heavy. It's almost 13 pounds.
Wow.
And it's just like, it's a battle axe, but I play super thick strings. I think it's 55 to 120 Diodario, just for the four string set, but it holds, man. And that thing's been dropped. Techs, I take off my basses and throw them to the tech every time. And it's like, some shit has happened to my gear from misuse. Not that bass, but it's all there. Something about it. So
nice.
Whatever they were doing in 78, they made a good one.
There you go. Well, and a ton of, you mentioned Electro-Harmonix pedals.
Yeah, so a ton of Electro-Harmonix stuff. Anything that they make, I buy, just because I love that brand, and it's awesome. So for the recording, I have all of their organ generators, from like the B9, the C9, the MEL9, all of it. Live, I just run into a tuner, straight from the tuner into a POG, the micro POG, POG into B9, B9 into a Klon into a Fox tone machine. And then from the Fox tone machine, I put it through the Fender, I think it's the Express, like their 4-pedal, I can't remember which one it's called. But it's like their preamp.
Okay.
And then that goes out to the basses and then front of house. But we also use that to kind of split the signal, because there's times, again, being just a 3-piece, where I'm running it as a direct line, but then I'll also put some dirt on what's coming through the amp, just to try to, when Miles goes to do a solo, we're able to split the signal, and it actually fills the room instead of feeling like there's nobody playing rhythm underneath it.
Sure.
And then just got really used to playing in drop D and holding a chord. You know what I mean? Keeping the line going on the low D, and then playing the root and the higher fifth up top to fill it out. So we try.
Very nice, very nice. And as we look ahead, again, we mentioned the tour. What plans are there for the future?
So the way that we do it with Miles is he's always so busy, from going with Alter Bridge to his stuff with Slash, that we're on 3-year cycles. Because of COVID, we shot our shot, and the majority of it was spent figuring out what we're going to do. So now from there, we just wrapped up what was the Ides of March cycle with the last European run this past summer. We're moving into Alter Bridge land for the end of the year. We're going to be releasing a new record there, Pawns and Kings, out October 14th. We'll do a whole cycle of that, and then we'll be back to Miles Soloville, I think, in 2024, beginning of 2025. So we have to plan that far in advance when Miles Kennedy is your singer, and he's in 3 amazing bands. So that's what it takes.
There you go. And if people want to know where to look, as to what you're up to. Where's the best places for them to look?
Sure. Just Instagram, I guess. That's everything from family to music to whatever I'm thinking at the time, good, bad, or indifferent.
Got you. And if I'm not mistaken, that would be Timothy, son of Timothy?
That's my clever way of being Tim Jr. Yes, Timothy, son of Timothy.
There you go. So it's not a Lord of the Rings reference or anything like that.
Yeah. It'd be cool. It'd be cooler if it was.
There you go. And of course, people that are following Miles Kennedy, mileskennedy.com is a great place to look as well.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, Tim, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you've got a lot going on. Folks, you've seen him here, Tim Tournier on Bass Musician Magazine.
Thanks, guys.